spare. Drug shame. Harry continues by explaining that he goes back to Eton, and he had explained that the meeting with Marco started to sort of fade away, but then he woke up to the actual nightmare, which was a front page headline saying Harry's drugs shame. And this was in January 2002. He explains that it was spread over 7 pages inside, and the editor had got her hands on some photos of Marco and Harry visiting a rehab centre as part of his charitable work, and repurposed the photos to make it look like he was attending a rehab centre in a personal capacity. He said that he read them and he could imagine everybody across the country in the Commonwealth coming to the same conclusion about this, and he felt heartbroken at the idea. But interestingly, his mind went to the fact that his own father and future stepmother had aided and abetted this. Now, it's not entirely clear to what extent that they had done so. And remember, we're not hearing Charles's or Camilla's version of events, but once again the narrative that's being fed from Harry of, I'm the victim. I'm the victim. I'm the one that was hung out to dry by my father and my stepmother. In order to make themselves look better, they threw me under the bus. Now, as I explained in the previous video, that is entirely conceivable because, of course, as narcissists themselves, they'd be seeking to nullify threats to control which were posed by their comparative unpopularity at that time, and Charles' desire, of course, to marry Camilla and to get the nation to accept her. However, we also know that with Harry, he has this massive and rampant victim mentality, some of it justified, but a lot of it not, and therefore, is this the case that he is rewriting the narrative here to portray himself as a victim of the behaviour of his father and his stepmother? And to say, look at them, see how cold and callous they are. In order to make themselves look good and curry favour with the newspaper, they allowed me to be exposed as a druggie. Now, what we also have to remember with this is he admits that he takes drugs, so it's not a fabrication. He admits that he has smoked marijuana at school. He's also admitted to taking cocaine. He's also admitted to taking magic mushrooms. I think later on in the book we find out that he did that at Courtney Cox's property. I'm sure she's thrilled that he did that. So he's admitted that he's a drug user. So these protests about being thrown under the bus, okay, he's young, it seems unfair, but actually it's not a lie. He has been taking drugs. Now, it might be argued at the end of the day, does it really matter? If he wants to take drugs, he could take drugs. Well, there's some that would argue, well, we should know, because first of all, it's illegal. Irrespective of what your moral standpoint is upon that, the fact is, it's illegal. And should he be engaging in acts of illegality? And of course, the fact is, what's being described is something that he's done, and he goes on to repeatedly admit it, of course, in his book. So it makes his protest seem a little bit hollow to my mind of, oh, look, I've been thrown under the bus. Yeah, but you were taking drugs. Okay, maybe they could have quashed it. But at the end of the day, if you didn't want to be reported on as taking drugs, perhaps you'd have been better off not taking drugs, Harry? And this does smack somewhat of this victim mentality of, I'm allowed to do what I like, you can't report on it, and it's not fair if you do. And it seems actually what he's angrier about is not the fact that he's been exposed as his drugs use, but rather he believes that it was as a consequence of his father failing to protect him. And I suspect, again, we have some more revisionist narrative going on here, because remember, what is the one thing that Harry and Harry's wife keep banging on about? We weren't protected. They protected other people. He said it in one of his recent interviews. the fact that when he talked about the motto and he said it's just a motto, other people have been protected, but we haven't. And I think this recollection is part of creating this impression that all through his life, he's never been afforded any protection, and he ought to have been. And that fits with the whinging narrative that he and his wife have put forward together. Naturally, of course, encouraged by her as part of her need for control. Harry explains that he phoned his brother, and he explained that he was sympathetic, and apparently he was even angrier because he was privy to more details about the spin doctoring that was going on. But at the same breath, he said, look, there's nothing to be done. This is royal life, so basically suck it up, buttercup. He says he called Marco, who was sympathetic, and then he asked about the editor's name. And interestingly, he explains that I've avoided speaking it, and I don't wish to repeat it here. Spare the reader, but also myself. And then he says, can it also be a coincidence that the name of the woman who pretended I went to rehab is a perfect anagram for rehabber cooks? And the person that he's talking about is Rebecca Brooks, who was the editor of, I think, the Murdoch papers, News of the World. And of course, I remember Murdoch defending her some time ago in relation to all the phone hacking allegations, etc. So, although he uses an anagram, it's quite clear who he's talking about. And he then goes on to explain that the newspaper continued to rehash what he describes as the rehabber cooks' libels, along with various new and equally fabricated accounts of goings-on in Club H. Our fairly innocent teenage clubhouse was made to sound like Caligula's bedchamber. And he then goes on to explain that he had to give a tour to one of his father's friends, and she wasn't interested in looking around the gardens. She wanted to know where Club H was, and pointed her in the direction of her, taking her down to the steps, and she goes, "Ooh, it even smells of weed." And Harry says, no, it didn't. It smelt of cut flowers, clean dirt, and maybe a hint of beer. But it's interesting that even when he said, look, we haven't done drugs down there, she winked at him. And he said, I thought she was going to ask me to sell her a bag. The problem is, Harry has done drugs, and he admits to doing so, and it's reported on. Now, it may well be the case that it didn't take place at Club H, or he's telling a lie about it. The fact is, he had taken drugs, but his anger here isn't so much about his exposure of being a drug taker. He obviously doesn't really care that much about it because he keeps admitting to it in his own publication. It's the fact that he believes that he wasn't protected by his father. Well, comment there about his father, but we're going to move on to another member of the family next. Join me in the next video.